Hey y'all, Melissa here at Twin Oaks Family Farm in rural Southeast Ohio, USA. Thanks for joining me. We're doing a series on getting ready for meat chickens. A lot of folks have experience raising chickens for meat production. Most of the time when we're going to raise chickens for meat production, the go-to bird is the Cornish Rock Cross meat chickens. We have some of those on site. We are going to be able to show you that we're an unexpected flock opportunity for us for 2025, but we're actually getting a brooder space ready for 225 Cornish Rock Cross meat chickens ordered from move-in on March 12th, 2025. So we're doing this series to show you the things that we prioritize when getting ready for meat chickens. That way, if you're raising meat chickens, you have sort of a checkoff list in your own mind that's a great reference for what does it take, what do we need to have in place to be ready for meat chickens. And you don't have to do the things that we demonstrate in exactly the same way that we do them. A lot of the particulars of how we prepare for birds depends on the quantity of birds we're getting, depends on our setup, depends on the resources that we have for the brooder space, the resources that we have for their growing and finishing space, the resources that we even have for storage of things like feedstuffs and bedding. But it gives you a starting point of these are the things to prioritize. So even if you do things differently, we want to show you these are the things that we emphasize in our preparation, because we really strongly feel that if we're going to start any kind of livestock, we need to be ready for it prior to its arrival on site. And holds true for meat chickens. We basically want everything to be turnkey ready for them before they are moving in. So today's topic is having bedding material available for the space that you are going to put them in. Minimum, you need to have bedding material available and down in their space that they're going to start in as their brooder. Best practice is try to estimate how much bedding you'll need for the entire time you're raising them. Try to buy all of that ahead of time. Try to have all of that actually on site before you even move the birds in. Then you know there's no way you're going to run out of the bedding material. There's no way money's going to get tight when we're middle of the process of raising these birds and we're not going to be able to prioritize buying bedding. Then we know there's no way that we're going to run out of bedding in the middle of raising them, go to the store, and they're out of it. Any kind of situation or scenario can come up. Even something like you can run out of bedding and it's just a busy week and you need 2 or 3 or 4 days before you can get to the store to buy bedding to replenish your stock of it. Any of these kinds of things can happen. So that's why we really do advocate for, if we can estimate how much of a supply we're going to need for the entire production time, go ahead and order it, secure it, buy it, pay for it, purchase it, get it home, have it on site. Do all that ahead of time, because if we do it ahead of time, we just avoid all those crazy what if scenarios that can absolutely come up in all of our lives. So we do have the added bonus today of being able to show you a brooder space that's already in use. So we really experienced chicken math in terms of, we had 12 egg production breed chickens ordered as hatchlings for March 5th, 2025, and we had the 12 turn into 97 by the end of the day. So we started with 12 little egg production pullets. We were gifted 7 additional egg production pullets, and then we came across an opportunity to purchase potentially 90 of these yellow fluffed chickens, and they are the meat chickens. They are Cornish Rock Cross meat chickens. So we ended up only being able to get 78 of them because other people were also trying to speak for them. But what we're getting ready for over here is moving in 225 chickens. Actually tomorrow from when we're recording this. We're recording on March 11th, 2025. Move-in day for that brooder space is March 12th. And we're preparing for 225 of these yellow fluffed birds to go over here, okay? But it's nice to have this visual reference of this brooder space. And we were just lucky that we had set up for 12, but it just so happened that the space that we had set up could accommodate up to 100 birds easily for move-in. So, you know, things just work out sometimes. So we're glad to see that. But we're talking specifically about bedding materials. So you can see What we prefer is down on the floor here for these birds and actually in use. And this is actually day 6 for this group of birds on this floor space. So they've used it some. Actually, we're ready to rebed a little bit. So we'll be adding bedding, but wanted you to see it in use. And so over here, we are cleaned out down to the what we call the floor material in this building. Now, sometimes floors are already finished floors, like you've poured concrete in there, and that's what you're working with, or you're working with a gravel base. In this case, we're working with a stone material that's called limestone screenings, and that's the kind of foundation material of this building. So that's more or less the floor material. And then we've had other flocks on this floor, so we've previously had bedding that chickens have used over there, and it's all been cleaned out down to where everything is packed solid. And so here we have our wood shavings. It's just pine wood shavings, and that's what we're going to put down on the floor. So actually in this space, which is basically about 10 foot the one direction by maybe about 8 foot the other direction, we're going to put down, for starters, just 2 of these bags of bedding, and they are 3 cubic feet compressed bags of bedding. I don't know, yeah, if we can kind of, right there, 3 cubic foot compressed. Okay, so kiln dried pine shavings. But we actually, so we're just going to put down 2 to start with right there on the floor space, and that's going to make that comfortable. It's going to make it absorbent, and it's going to also help, like, with a little bit of ambient condition comfort. It'll help them be warmer when the nights cool down, and it'll help them be a little cooler when the days warm up. And so even though we only need 2 to start with, what we did was we kind of looked through the next 6 weeks. So with meat chickens, you really need just 6 weeks to start, grow, and finish them, honestly. We know a lot of people raise them longer. You can do that, and you can kind of adjust feed schedules, lighting schedules, how they're housed. You can go between pastured and confined. You can do different things with the production system, and you can stretch out production with them longer than 6 weeks, but honestly, it isn't necessary. We have experience that has taught us we can start, grow, and finish Cornish Rock Cross meat chickens in 6 weeks for excellent poultry. So that's what we do. We use a production system that accomplishes that. And so that's why I said we're looking out 6 weeks time. So we're looking out 6 weeks time and estimating, well, how much bedding are we going to need to start, grow, and finish them? Not just what do we need when we first move them in. So we went ahead and went with an estimate of about 20 of these bales that we showed you of the pine shavings for the birds for this first flock. And we went ahead and we bought 20 bags or bales, whatever you want to call them, of the bedding. So that assures us, hey, that bedding is here. We feel confident we can get through the first flock with 20 of these bales of bedding. And we highly recommend decide what you're going to use for bedding material, find out where you can source it, find out what the price is, get the money together, and buy as much of it as you think you're going to need for the whole time that you're raising the birds. That's the bottom line. We really feel strongly that that just helps you have less stress while you're raising them. It helps with your birds, because, you know, we also are affected by scarcity as we're raising meat chickens or raising livestock or taking care of things. If we have a supply of it and then the supply starts to dwindle, you know, we start to go, okay, I'm gonna be really conservative on using that, or I'm gonna skimp a little bit here or skimp a little bit here. Well, the thing is with the birds, like, it really benefits them if we don't skimp. Bedding material is a really big deal. It's a really important component of raising them successfully, especially when their production system is basically in a confinement. And we want to keep that floor always, always, always absorbent. And so the thing with meat birds that we don't really see at this age when they're like 6 days old, but we're going to see as they grow, is they manure a lot because they eat a lot. But we want that. So they're going to manure a lot. And the thing with chickens is the manure is the total waste package. So it basically includes what we perceive as urine and solids. So it has a high ammonia content, and that's that smell we get off of it. And if we don't keep the bedding replenished and clean and dry on top, then those fumes are not absorbed and they become overwhelming. I mean, that's a really elementary kind of description of it, but that's really how it plays out day to day in real life. So we need to have the bedding there absorbing that moisture, because it's also kind of trapping some of that we don't want overwhelming the air quality in there. And the other key things about bedding with meat birds is part of the reason you need it to be really absorbent is because it's the absorbent materials that are cushy and give them cushion and don't become slick. So like that's the primary reason we wouldn't leave this floor material as is and just put 225 birds on it, because there's really nothing there to absorb the moisture from the manure load, and at some point that's all going to get slick on top because there's nowhere for it to absorb. When it gets slick, these birds are going to struggle to be able to move around on it. They're going to struggle to be able to keep their balance on it. There's going to be slipping, there's going to be injury. We don't want that. The other problem that happens if you don't have super absorbent bedding, the other problem that's going to happen is that manure load would lay on top of that floor, and the birds are exposed to more of it, and they can actually get chemical burns on their skin from the just overwhelming manure load on top of the floor if there's not some good quality bedding there to absorb that. So basically, like I said with this brooder, we are wanting now to put more bedding in the brooder, because you can see where they use the brooder the most, right under the heat lamps, because that's where that bedding is now starting to pack together, and you can see it's darker, so it's absorbed manure load and it needs to have fresh bedding put on top of it. So out here where they're not under the heat lamps, they're simply not here as much, so there's much less manure load out here on that bedding around the edges. So at any rate, so we just want to emphasize, especially if you're raising meat chickens, but if you're raising any kind of chickens, the bedding material is really important. You want to select good bedding material that is going to be absorbent of the moisture, that is not going to get slick as it absorbs moisture, that is going to give them some comfort. And when we replenish this and put new bedding down in there, like, it's something they can nestle down into. So we observe that when it's cold outside, cold temperatures, that dry, clean bedding is something that helps them stay comfortably warm. And then vice versa too. When it's super hot outside, the bedding, if it's fresh, will actually help kind of keep them cool. And as you get into using the bedding and the birds get older, another thing that happens is the more manure load that the birds put on the bedding, it actually, once it's maxed out at what it can absorb, it actually can release heat back into their brooder. So again, I mean, that can actually be leveraged both ways. If it's really cold and you need a little added heat in there, you can kind of let that get to almost to that threshold where it's going to need replaced soon, but it's at a point where it's producing a little bit of heat. You can kind of leverage that to the bird's advantage. And by the same token, if it's producing heat and they're dealing with really hot conditions, you can just cover it with fresh bedding, and that's immediately going to tamp down the heat production you're getting off of that bedding and help the birds out. So there's some ins and outs, some moving pieces with that, but basically you need to just make sure that your meat birds have access to good quality bedding. It needs to be clean, it needs to be dry, it needs to be absorbent. So as they manure load into it, it's going to be absorbing what they're putting on top of it. It's going to be getting wet and it's going to be getting compacted. And as that happens, you need to just simply add more bedding to it. And that's why it's important to consider the quantity of bedding you start with. Hey, while we're wrapping up here, look at those two birds at the water. They're both exactly the same age. Noticeable size difference. The one coming toward us is one of the egg production pullets, and the one that walked away and sat under the heat lamp is one of the Cornish rock cross meat chickens. But just a great visual that even at this age, just a week in, we're already seeing noticeable size difference between the egg birds and the meat birds. Kind of a good opportunity there to see it too. The silver one is a lavender Orpington, and all the birds around it are meat birds, but the silver one and the one to its right, you know, great example there. The one to its right is noticeably bigger in the body and filling out, and they're exactly the same age. They were all hatched March 5th, 2025. So we'll put bedding down in here and give you a shot of the finished product, of having it ready to go with its bedding before we cut the video here. Okay, so I'll show you where we bedded the brooder that we're preparing. I'll also show you where we rebedded for the chicks that we already have on site. But bottom line is, pick out ahead of time of your chicks arriving what kind of bedding you want to use, and go ahead and get a reasonable amount of it secured and stocked so that you already have it on hand as you are raising your birds, and put it down in your space before your birds arrive so that it's ready to go when you move them in. So over here, we did just do 2 of those 3 cubic foot bales. I actually just opened each one up, dumped it out in the pen. It kind of comes out like in flakes, similar to the way hay or straw bales are flaked, but of course it falls apart much easier than hay or straw bales. But I just emptied 2 bags, kind of one on each half of the pen, and then took a pitchfork, plastic pitchfork, and just spread it around a little bit. And so it is important to get that in, because one thing I noticed is that it is actually going to impact the height that we estimated the heat lamps hung out. We're probably going to be able to raise them 1 link or 2 links where we estimated the height, because as you put that bedding down, it actually, you know, fills up floor space height wise and kind of changes the height that you're dealing with there. So at any rate, so bedding wise, that pen is ready to go. And heat lamp wise, we have another video that we talk about that too. So here's also this group where right under the heat lamps, I just added basically just handfuls of bedding in the compacted areas where they've been using the bedding, and see how they love it. See how they love it. So I also wanted to note, as we're ending here, it's interesting that our outdoor temperature is 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and we have seen the birds using the heat lamps less as the day has warmed up, but it's interesting to note that even at 70 degrees Fahrenheit outdoors, they are still utilizing the heat lamps for warmth. So baby chicks really, really do want some of that targeted warmth for increasing comfort with their ambient conditions. And the rule of thumb you want to go by on that is always, when they move in, we're aiming for 95 degrees Fahrenheit ambient temperature, and you can evaluate how close or far off you are on that by the bird's behavior. If they look comfortable, they're comfortable. If they're piling up on each other, look like they're cold, they're cold. If they're panting heavily, they're too hot. So you can evaluate by that. But it just goes to show they want like 95 the first week, about 90 the second week, and they do benefit from the targeted warmth of the heat lamps appropriately. Thanks y'all for joining us. We greatly appreciate it. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And we do also have a membership option on the channel where you can join, and that helps support the channel and helps support our work here at our home place, just trying to keep a farming operation going. So please consider it, and above all, just thanks for your time and effort watching. Leave us a comment. Thanks y'all.